Hey guys, I realize that I have not made a video in a while, so today what I thought I would talk about is English in the Philippines. English in the Philippines. Those of you who have watched some of my videos know that I became fluent in Tagalog when I was living in the Philippines, and I do really encourage people to learn the language if you have that ability. But today, what I'm going to talk about is English and getting by on English because even if you are committed to learning the language, you're obviously not going to know it as soon as you go over there. And you may get over there and visit the Philippines and just find out that you stink at learning a new language. I do know people that just, for whatever reason, don't seem to be able to pick up new languages. So, anyway, let's talk about this a little bit. The first thing that I want to say here is that the English level in the Philippines is generally it's very good. It's one of the English is one of the national languages, and children start learning English as soon as they're in elementary school. So especially when you compare English in the Philippines to other parts of Asia, it's very good, and even the accent. I don't want to sound critical or disrespectful of other countries, but if you compare listening to a Filipino speaking English to someone, let's say from China or somewhere else that learned it in that country, the accent that Filipinos have tend to be easier to understand and a little bit easier on the ears. So when you combine some of these factors, what this means is when you go to the Philippines, you can get by pretty well in English. So if something happens and you never just are able to learn the local language, or for those first few months while you're just trying to get by and maybe in the process of learning the language, the nice thing is you're going to at least be able to survive and get along pretty well. I had a mentor when I first moved to the Philippines that was had basically zero English or language ability. I mean, he had zero Tagalog ability, and he could understand just a little bit, but he just never was able to learn it. Yet he was a very effective missionary in the Philippines because his heart was to love the people and respect the culture. So he did quite well. And I'm just putting all of this together to say for this first major point, you can get by on English and you can do pretty well on English in the Philippines. Is it ideal? Is it as good as knowing the local language wherever you are? Of course not. Of course not. But you're not going to feel like you're always struggling there. And that's a big difference between being in the Philippines and being in other parts of Asia. I can remember when I traveled around in China for a few weeks, just going to a restaurant and ordering food was difficult because I don't know any Mandarin and we did not have an interpreter with us. So at least things like that, you're not going to have any trouble getting by for the most part. Now, a few other things that I'll say here, I've got notes like I always do. Keep in mind that the English ability that you encounter there is going to, it's much better than other parts of Asia, but it is going to vary from person to person. And there's going to be a couple of factors that influence this. One, of course, is education. If someone is more educated, there's a chance that they're going to be better at English. So, in other words, if you meet someone just with a high school degree or a high school diploma, that person may not be as good in English as someone who's had the opportunity to pursue higher education. It can also have to do with where they grew up and the opportunities that they've had to practice. If you meet someone, for example, this is just generally speaking, if you meet someone who's grown up in kind of a more provincial environment and that person is not as educated and mainly has just grown up speaking the local dialect, then obviously they're not going to be as fluent as someone who has, let's say, grown up in Manila or Angeles City and has been exposed to a lot of different opportunities to practice English. So, for example, My wife's English is very, very good, and it's gotten even better since we've moved here to the States. But she's a college graduate, and then after she graduated college, she was in kind of an international setting in terms of the place that she worked. So she had to talk to her supervisor in English all the time. She was meeting people through that are from different parts of the world. So obviously, that helped her become very good in English. But others have not had the same opportunity. So just keep in mind that not everyone you meet is going to be super, super fluent with their English. Another thing to keep in mind is that generally speaking, people are going to be able to understand you better than they're going to be able to communicate back to you in English. Just because they're used to the media, the movies, the television shows. So if you ask something or if you're talking to them, most of the time they can understand things that you're saying, but some of them are not going to be as comfortable communicating back to you in English. And a lot of times, what I've noticed is a lot of times with Filipinos, they're quite capable of expressing themselves in English, but they're shy about it because they're afraid that their grammar or their pronunciation is going to be off. And so a lot of times it's just a confidence issue. But just keep that in mind. Sometimes you're going to find that people are reluctant in the Philippines. People are reluctant to speak to you in English because they think you're not going to be able to understand them, or or their English is not going to be good enough. So that's just another little obstacle that you'll have to get over. A few more things to keep in mind. I would say that if you first move to the Philippines and you're getting by on English while you're trying to learn another language, keep a few things in mind. First, if you're one of those people who talks really, really fast, you need to slow it down a little bit. And I'm not saying you have to go super slow, but if you know there are some people that just they talk really fast and just all 100 words per minute or whatever. If you talk really fast, you'll find that if you'll slow it down just a little bit, that people will understand you much better. And another thing to keep in mind is the idioms. We use a lot of idioms that we don't even think about. Sometimes they translate well, sometimes they do not translate at all. So what are some examples? Well, an idiom that actually works in both languages is being hard-headed. In English, when we talk about being stubborn or hard-headed, in Filipino, if you talk about matagas ang ulo mo, that's your head is hard. It's the same idea, hard-headed. But other idioms do not work at all. So let me think of an example. I know here in the South, I don't know if this is an idiom that I've heard up north, but here in the southeastern United States, if we're talking about joking, we say, I'm just pulling your leg, meaning I'm joking. Well, if you say that in the Philippines, that does not work. Or another thing that we say is, it's kind of an idiom, if we talk about my nose is running, meaning you have congestion, that if you translated that literally to a Filipino, it would make no sense. It would mean that your nose is literally running somewhere. So in the Philippines, they would just say, "May sipon ako," I have congestion. So those are just a few things to keep in mind. And to summarize, you can get by really well on English in the Philippines, especially compared to other countries. It's not ideal. If you can learn another language, it's awesome. And you'll find that you'll do better if you learn Tagalog or whatever, or a language that associates with whatever region you're in. But at the end of the day, if your heart is in the right place and you really want to love the people and respect them and get along with them, you'll do pretty well in English. So I hope this video helps, and if you have a question or comment, feel free to leave it below. Remember one thing, if you're going to comment on my videos, you must be respectful. I delete disrespectful comments just because I don't have time for it.